My name is Mila. I'm 34 years old. I used to be a college lecturer now. I'm just a woman who's lived through what many would call a perfect marriage. My husband Zachary was a successful financial consultant. Charming, polished, and the same man who once told me, "No one else would ever agree to marry you but me." At my father-in-law's 60th birthday party, in a mansion decorated to the nines, in front of over 30 people, family, colleagues, close friends, Zachary stood up, raised a glass of red wine, flashed his smug smile, and suddenly announced, "As of today, I've officially filed for divorce. Mila will return to that shabby little apartment I dragged her out of 6 years ago. Let's wish her good luck." The room fell dead silent. Someone dropped a spoon. Someone choked on their drink. And me? I simply stood up, pulled a red folder from my purse, and placed it in the center of the table. "Good luck to you. You're going to need it." Have you ever been betrayed by the one person you trusted most right at the moment when everything felt safe? Have you ever felt like a pawn in a story that was supposed to be yours? If you've ever felt pushed out of a game you didn't even make the rules for, leave a comment under this video. Hit like and subscribe to the channel to follow the rest of my story, the one where they thought I would collapse, but instead, I began rewriting everything from the wreckage they left behind. After that party, a lot of people asked how I managed to stay so calm. But the truth is, I had been living behind a mask for so many years that smiling through the storm had become second nature. When I met Zachary, I was teaching modern philosophy at a public university in Oregon. I loved my job, my students, and the deep discussions about ethics and human purpose that often stretched into the late afternoons. Zachary came to the school during a finance seminar the university hosted. He walked in with the air of someone used to being noticed. Expensive suit, dark tie, a sly but captivating smile. After his talk, he approached me in the lobby and opened with a light joke. "Between finance and philosophy, which one do you think explains the fear of loss better?" We started dating shortly after. And within less than a year, I became the wife of Zachary Coleman, a man my family and friends called perfect, wealthy, successful, charming, and eloquent. When we got married at a lakeside resort near Lake Tahoe, everyone thought I had landed the ideal husband. 3 months after our wedding, I submitted my resignation. Not because I wanted to, but because Zachary told me that his wife shouldn't have to stress over a university paycheck and pointless faculty meetings. He showed me our investment account statements, long lines of numbers I didn't fully understand then. Said, "We have enough money for you to never worry about anything again. Why not just focus on building our home?" I resisted, of course. But he just gave a quiet chuckle, patted my shoulder like I was a naive child, and said, "Sweetheart, no one's saying you're not smart. But you don't have to prove anything anymore. Being my wife, that's enough." I said I would only take a year off. But when I tried to go back to teaching, he told me the school had changed, the curriculum was different, students weren't the same. Then he added, "Why would you want to leave this beautiful house just to go sit in some dusty office full of stress?" I stayed silent, and I began to question my own decisions. I gradually lost touch with my colleagues. My college friends invited me out for coffee, but I often declined. Zachary didn't like me going out too much. He'd say, "When women have too much free time, they usually end up gossiping about their husbands." I laughed it off. But inside, cracks were beginning to form. He controlled every expense. I didn't have my own card, just a supplementary one where every transaction report went to his email. If I bought a book that cost over $20 without telling him, he'd bring it up at dinner. "Why did you need this? It's not like we're short on books." I used to have my own bank account before we married, but he convinced me to consolidate everything into a centralized system for better efficiency. I signed because I trusted him. Later, I found out my name had been removed from every official financial document. When I asked, he gave a flat smile. "It's just an accounting detail. You're still my wife. Why worry?" When my mom called, I said I was doing fine. When my sister invited me home for the holidays, I made up excuses. The family photos became fewer. My phone, a brand new iPhone Zachary bought for me, was tied to a family plan where he alone controlled the iCloud password. I couldn't delete apps, couldn't log into a different account. And if I tried to change the password, he'd ask, "What are you trying to hide?" The three-story house with its wide glass windows and walnut floors gradually became a gilded cage. I once thought I was a princess in a castle, but more and more, I realized I was just another trophy for him to show off. We often attended cocktail parties and networking events. Zachary always held my hand when we walked in but never looked at me while speaking. He'd introduce me as his full-time housewife and sometimes added, "She used to be a professor. But she realized happiness isn't found in chalkboards and lesson plans." People laughed. I laughed too. But I noticed the sympathetic glances from a few women. One of them, a partner's sister, lightly touched my back and whispered, "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." I don't remember when I started lying to myself. Maybe when I told my best friend, "Zachary just wants to take care of me." Maybe when I brushed off my mom's concern and said, "I'm fine. My husband is good to me." Or maybe it was the night I sat alone in our room listening to him laugh on a Zoom call with his guy friends, calling me a textbook dependent who happens to cook well. I looked at myself in the mirror. Pale face, hastily tied hair, blank eyes. No one would guess that someone who once lectured to hundreds of students now felt breathless just trying to buy a new dress. I made the bed, reorganized old books, and accidentally touched a worn leather notebook I hadn't seen in years. I used to write lecture notes in it. That day, I wrote a single sentence on the first page. "If he cuts you off from everyone else, that's not protection. That's control." I closed the notebook, placed it under my pillow, and sighed. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew if I stayed silent I would disappear from my own life. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I used to think that if there were no bruises, no shouting, no slamming doors, then it couldn't be called abuse. But there's another kind of violence, quieter, sharper, that seeps into the small moments of your day until you can no longer recognize who you are. Zachary never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He had his own methods far more effective for wearing me down piece by piece. "This dress?" He scoffed when I walked out of the bedroom in a cream-colored dress I had picked for myself. "You look like you're about to teach Sunday school, not attend a party with your husband." I went back into the room and changed into another. A black one, simpler, more conservative. He gave a slight nod, said nothing more. I told myself, at least I still get to go with him. It was a weekend gathering with familiar investors. On the way, I quietly asked, "Would it be okay if I sat near you tonight?" He didn't look at me. Just answered in a flat tone, "As long as you don't interrupt when I'm talking." That night, stepping into a room full of lights and clinking glasses, I finally understood my role. To stand beside him, smile on cue, stay quiet when expected, and above all never cause trouble. In conversations, Zachary often made jokes about me. "My meal is an expert at baking," he'd say, stressing the last word like it was the only thing I was ever good at. Another time, when someone asked about my future plans, he answered for me, "She's better at cleaning house than making plans." People laughed. Some looked at me with pity. Some thought it was just playful banter. I laughed too. But my smile never reached my eyes. At home things were even quieter. I wasn't allowed to make purchases without checking first. One time I tried placing an order on Amazon, a discounted juicer, and Zachary canceled it within 10 minutes. "We already have a juicer," he said, even though the old one had stopped working months ago. I wasn't allowed to choose what to buy at the grocery store. The list had already been prepared in the shared app. If I purchased anything extra, he would open the expense section and say, "Did you think money grows on trees?" Hey. He frequently called me his cute dependent. Once, I reacted and said that the way he spoke hurt me. He crossed his arms, looked at me with a cold smile and said, "I'm just teasing. Have you lost all sense of humor?" I began to doubt my own feelings. When you live long enough with someone who constantly tells you that you're too sensitive, too dramatic, you start to believe you are the problem. I stopped using Facebook. Instagram was deleted. Zachary said, "Smart women don't need to prove anything on social media." But I knew what he really wanted was to cut off all my outside connections. Even my phone wasn't private. Everything was tied to the iCloud account Zachary controlled. Once, I tried to change the password and less than 5 minutes later, he called. What are you trying to hide? I once tried calling my best friend Alyssa, a elementary school teacher a few hours away. We grew up together, once promised to be each other's bridesmaid. The call lasted less than 3 minutes before Zachary came into the room, said nothing, just looked at me with a gaze like a knife. After I hung up, he asked, "Does Alyssa even remember my birthday?" I froze. He added, "If she doesn't, why do you remember her?" I never called back. He gradually built a world where I was the only one not trusted. Every time I forgot something small, left water in the fridge, forgot to turn off the hallway light, neglected to reply to his mother's email, Zachary would sigh. As if to prove the obvious, I was useless. "Don't you feel like a child who needs supervision?" he asked after I mixed up the schedule for the AC repair. I stayed silent. If I spoke, he would replay every tiny mistake I had ever made like a rewound tape. I used to think I was strong. I had stood in front of hundreds of students, debating Greek philosophy with sharp arguments. Yet now, just choosing the wrong sauce for dinner made me feel like a failure. Once, at another dinner party, Zachary told the table I had forgotten my wallet at the supermarket and had to call him to pay. Everyone laughed. He looked at me and added, "My Mila can teach Socrates, but she can't remember where she left her wallet." I laughed. But inside, I heard something crack. That night, when Zachary slept deeply, I sat on the stair landing, holding a cup of cold tea. The dim yellow light spilled onto the wooden floor, casting my shadow long like another self. No one yelled at me. No one cursed or smashed anything. Yet I had never felt so small. And the scariest part was that I had grown accustomed to it. I had grown used to being belittled. Used to being mocked. Used to asking permission for every small action. Used to the point where I no longer realized I was living under a punishment with no name. That night, quietly, I wrote a line on the back of an old business card, a short line, but the first time I dared to put into words what I was thinking. If I don't exist in his eyes, then I must see myself. I placed that card in the middle of a long-forgotten notebook. Then I closed it and set it on the bookshelf. No one knew. No one needed to know. But I had begun marking my presence again. Silently, quietly, but genuinely. The next morning started like any other. I got up early, made coffee, prepared breakfast, neatly laid Zachary's suit jacket on the chair outside the dressing room. He had gone golfing early with friends, leaving the house in its familiar silence. After tidying the kitchen, I planned to dust the bookshelves in his office, a corner I rarely touched. The key to the file cabinet lay beneath a small bonsai tree. I had known that for a long time but never thought to open it. That day, for some reason, I tried. And in the third drawer below, behind a stack of investment files and old bills, was an unfamiliar phone. It had no case, no screen lock, no fingerprint protection. I sat down, hands trembling slightly, and opened the messaging app. The first line appeared from a name I had never seen. "B. Still remembering your perfume from last night. Send more pictures, I can't sleep. Next weekend, the old room." Just like Miami. I didn't cry. The feeling wasn't pain, it was emptiness. Like standing in front of a cliff with no echo. I scrolled down, reading further. Each message was a slice straight into the suspicions I had brushed aside for months. Some messages had pictures. Some lines of conversation were starred. When I saw the photo of the woman, bright blonde hair, red lipstick, familiar eyes, I realized it was Brittany, Zachary's personal assistant. I had met her a few times at events. She always dressed perfectly, just enough formal, just enough attractive. When shaking my hand, she smiled lightly, tilting her head politely. I had seen her walk behind Zachary, holding his iPad, reminding him of meetings, but I never thought. Or rather, I chose to ignore it. I set the phone on the table and photographed every single message, each image, every detail with dates and times. Not for revenge, not for jealousy, but because I needed the truth on my side. That evening, I messaged Natalie. Natalie James had been my friend since college. She studied law. I studied philosophy. When I got married, she was the only one brave enough to ask straight, "Mila, are you sure?" I forced a smile and said I was fine. After the wedding, we lost touch for several years. Not because of conflict, but because I gradually withdrew from everything that had once connected me. The message I sent contained only one line: I need to see you. Just us. No contact through this phone. I'll come to the office. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual, put on a long wool coat and flats. Zachary was still asleep. I left a simple note, going to the grocery store. Then I stepped out with a USB hidden in the inner pocket of my coat. Natalie's law office was in an old building near downtown, where she specialized in representing female clients who had experienced emotional or financial abuse. I entered, sat in the cold leather chair, unsure where to begin. Natalie looked at me silently for a long moment. Then she handed me a cup of tea, the kind I had always liked, chamomile with honey. "What's his name?" she asked. "Zachary Coleman," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "How long?" Natalie opened her laptop, hands already typing. 8 years. 6 living together. 2 of silence. I told her everything, leaving out nothing. The times he mocked me in front of friends. The half-joking, half-true words that made me shrink like a shadow. The bank accounts transferred out of my name. The invisible limits I dared not cross. And finally, the screenshots of messages with Brittany. Natalie didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I finished, she reached for the USB. "Good, you're not saying anything. You're recording. You're storing. You're preparing." She nodded. "You're doing it right. But I don't know where to start." She opened a sample file, sliding it toward me. "The first step is to verify all assets still listed jointly. Do you have copies of the home contract?" I shook my head. "Zachary kept all the paperwork." "No problem," Natalie said. "He's careful, but not as careful as he thinks. If he ever declared your name for tax purposes, you have the right to request related statements." I felt something in my chest loosen. I didn't feel alone. "Do you think I should tell him now?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. Natalie tilted her head. "Not yet. You're not confronting. You're building the foundation. Every step needs evidence. He's the kind of person who will deny everything, if it's not in black and white. Trust me, I've handled dozens of cases like this." I nodded. "And Mila," she added, her voice lowering, "you are not as weak as you think. Weak is when you keep choosing to trust someone who no longer deserves it. But now, you've chosen to trust yourself." I left the office in the late afternoon, autumn sunlight slanting across the car window, scattering gold onto my hands as I gripped the steering wheel. In my purse was the first plan. And for the first time in years, I no longer feared the sound of a key turning in the lock when I came home. I knew I was not free yet, but I knew I had begun. And that was enough. I didn't go straight home after meeting Natalie. Instead, I pulled into a small lot near Walmart, sat in the car for a while with my head against the steering wheel, and breathed deeply as if I needed to collect enough courage for the next step. I walked into the store with my coat buttoned up, a knit hat pulled low over my forehead. No one recognized me. I didn't want anyone to. At the phone counter, I chose a cheap handset, no GPS, no personal information required. The clerk only asked, "Activate it for you now?" I nodded. In less than 10 minutes, I walked out with a phone loaded with a new SIM, the battery full, completely out of Zachary's reach. On the way home, I stopped at a small coffee shop, sat in a corner, turned on the free Wi-Fi, and downloaded the apps I needed: a call recorder, a cloud storage app, a secure notes app. I carefully set passwords that were completely different from anything I had used before. Each action felt like a pinprick through the fog that had surrounded me for years. That evening, when Zachary came home after a long meeting, I was folding clothes in the bedroom, the burner phone hidden deep in the nightstand drawer beneath a few pairs of old socks he never touched. "What are you making?" he asked, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it on a chair. "Honey roasted chicken and a salad," I answered softly. He said, indifferent, and went straight to the bathroom. I sat there, folding his gray winter sweater, eyes fixed on the closing door. Every small action I took now had a purpose. I no longer resisted when I was belittled. I didn't argue when I was accused of being wrong. I only recorded. Quietly, patiently, precisely. That night, when he reached his third glass of wine and began to mutter about useless subordinates and women who do nothing but complain, I quietly touched the spare phone, turned on the recording mode, and slipped it under a placemat on the table. I mean it, Mila, he mumbled, his eyes already a little glassy. Without me you wouldn't survive. I smiled softly, as if I had heard that line 100 times. But it didn't land. I bent to straighten a stack of magazines and nodded as if in agreement. If we get divorced, what do you think I'll get? This microwave? He laughed. A long, scornful laugh, as if the idea were the worst joke he'd ever heard. Maybe, I answered. I don't even know which bank our accounts are at. He raised an eyebrow, a little pleased with himself. See, there you even admit it yourself. I nodded. And I remembered. The next week, I found a document in an envelope Zachary had left on the kitchen counter. It was a draft agreement between him and a real estate investment firm to convert the ownership of a large parcel of land into a joint asset management trust between the spouses temporary, supposedly to defer taxes, according to a note. My signature line was blank. I didn't ask. I didn't sign. I photographed the original, stored it, and took it to a print shop to make copies. Then I put it back exactly where I had found it. 2 weeks later, while Zachary was on a long call with his lawyer about expediting the ownership paperwork, he set the stack of papers in front of me while I was wiping the kitchen counter. Sign here for me, please, it's urgent, he said, busy but still gentle. It's just house stuff, nothing to worry about. I took the pen. I hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Just to formalize things, right? Yes, he replied, eyes never leaving his phone screen. I signed. The stroke was smooth and decisive. Then I gently set the contract back on the table without asking another question. The next morning I drove to see Natalie. We sat in her small office with the early sunlight falling on the large map mounted on the wall behind her. Did he have you sign it? She asked. Last night, I said, setting a copy of the contract on her desk. My signature is real. But it wasn't voluntary. Natalie examined each page carefully and nodded. We can prove you were not properly informed. And if necessary, I can bring in an expert to testify in court about a pattern of financial abuse. I took a deep breath. Natalie never used the word easy unless she was certain. I saw in her eyes not hesitation but careful preparation. That evening, when I got home, Zachary had a bottle open and an old game on TV replaying a match. He sat on the sofa, legs crossed, laughing loudly when the referee flashed a red card. Anything interesting today? He asked without turning around. No, I replied, going into the kitchen. I opened the fridge and took out the smoked meat he liked, my hands still cold from the frozen surface. But inside I was no longer cold. I was preparing. And every small step I took now, even a light reply, a non-reactive nod, or a signature placed where he expected it, was leading toward a door he didn't know was opening. That afternoon a soft rain fell. I was cleaning the study when I noticed Zachary's Apple Watch left on the charging table. The screen was lit, unlocked, a call in progress. Perhaps he was on a Bluetooth headset somewhere else in the house and didn't realize the watch. It was still broadcasting sound. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. At first I only wanted to bring it to him. But then a line froze me in my tracks. No, I mean it. I'll make her stand up empty-handed. I'll file for divorce right at my father's birthday party, make it theatrical. The whole family will see. Let's see how she holds her head then. I froze at the doorway, the dish towel still in my hand. The voice was Nate, Zachary's oldest friend from college, the one who always laughed at Zachary's cruel jokes. You think she'll react how? Nate scoffed. She'll definitely cry. Women always do. Especially those who leech off someone. She'll crumble. But don't worry, I'll give her a little card that says good luck. Zachary laughed loud and satisfied. The sound of wine pouring into a glass carried clearly over the speaker. I closed the door softly and stepped back as if I'd walked into a block of ice. The house felt strangely still, while a storm churned inside me. So it was all a performance. And I wasn't just a supporting actor. I was the target for humiliation. He didn't just want to end our marriage, he wanted to end me, publicly, deliberately, in front of family, friends, and relatives. All afternoon I paced the kitchen, wiping the same countertop over and over, boiling the kettle 3 times without pouring. My mind unraveled into tangled thoughts, snatches of conversation, glances, signs I had ignored all this time. And then I saw something more clearly than ever. Zachary had never treated me as a wife. He treated me as a prop, part of the polished life he displayed. Something he could lift, set down, or break without justification. I picked up the spare phone, opened the recording app, and saved the conversation that had just been coming from the Apple Watch. Every second was immediately backed up to the separate email Natalie had set up for me earlier, with the simple subject line: Evidence of emotional abuse, September 17th. That night I still cooked as usual. Beef braised in red wine, his favorite. When Zachary came home, lightly wet from the rain, I greeted him with a dry terry cloth towel and a gentle smile. "You're home earlier than I thought," I said, reaching to take his briefcase. "The meeting was cancelled. Besides, tonight I need to make a few more calls for my father's event," he replied in an even tone, eyes glancing over the already set table. "Can I help with anything?" "No. I just need you to watch dinner and to, well, watch yourself," he said. I smiled. Sometimes the cruelest thing is not the insult itself, but the way someone says it as if it were an obvious truth. After he finished dinner and went upstairs to make calls, I went into my office, turned on the printer, and began printing every message, every recording, every document I had collected over the past 3 months. Then I arranged them into a thick file, a deep red binder. Not by accident. I wanted it to look like a gift, neat, formal, and undeniable. I called Natalie the next morning. "You guessed right," I said, my voice low and slow. "He's planning to end everything in front of my family." "How much time?" "How much time?" 3 weeks. My father-in-law's birthday is on October 12th. He said he's going to give me a big divorce surprise. I heard a long exhale on the other end. "Then we'll give him a gift he can't undo." Natalie planned with me. All the paperwork would be filed 3 days before that event. Any assets that could be proven as jointly held would be frozen. Documents proving emotional abuse, evidence of infidelity, and forged contracts would be delivered to Zachary's legal counsel on the very morning of the party with third-party time-stamped confirmation. I quietly scheduled an appointment with a therapist to obtain a written evaluation of the prolonged psychological impact. I went to the bank to get copies of every unclear transaction. I went to the notary to verify my signature with exact dates. I sent everything to Natalie. She said just 3 words: "Mila, you're doing very well." In the days that followed, Zachary behaved more normal than ever. He smiled more, even hugged me in front of friends at a small gathering. "My wife cooks the best in this area," he said, patting my shoulder. People laughed, I laughed too. But no one knew I was counting down the days. One evening Zachary handed me an envelope and asked me to write the names of guests on the invitations for his father's party. I took it, looking down at the pre-printed line on the cover: "Let us celebrate the life of a wonderful man and together welcome a surprise." A surprise, indeed. He had no idea that the surprise would not come from him. Not this time. Not when I was the one rewriting the script. And I had learned something. Controllers always assume they control everything until the person they control decides not to play by their rules anymore. I sat in Natalie's office, sunlight from the window washing over the stacks of carefully arranged documents on her desk. The thin smell of coffee from the reception area lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of freshly printed paper. I had never imagined I would become so familiar with terms like power of attorney, transfer, marital assets, and market valuation. Natalie set her pen down after flipping through the final page of the prospage. Comparison. She removed her glasses, leaned on her elbows, and looked at me with an expression part admiration, part caution. "You know," she said slowly, "I've worked with very strong women. But you calculate like a seasoned attorney." I smiled, but not with pride. Because I had never expected to learn these things the way I was learning them. "What do we have in hand?" I asked, my voice low. I didn't use the word weapon. Natalie didn't either. This was not a fight with blood. It was truth documents, signatures, seals, clear timelines. The recordings are stored with third-party timestamp verification. Natalie began listing. Your trauma journal has been corroborated by the therapist as showing signs of prolonged emotional abuse. The invoices he sent from his personal account to Brittany show irregular transactions. And this next part is interesting. She pulled out a gray file and pushed it toward me. This is the asset statement from 2021 to now. In it, he declared that you were a co-owner of an investment fund, account code ZFC458AL, opened as a spousal trust. I frowned. I had never heard that name. A chill ran down my spine as I looked at Natalie. You mean, I'm listed as a joint owner? Yes. And you didn't even know. Natalie nodded firmly. That's his weakness. If you didn't know, it means you never consented. And if your name was used to declare assets without your informed agreement, he could be sued for financial fraud. I was silent for a moment. Everything began to click into place. I remembered Zachary once calling a partner in the kitchen, speaking loudly. Put it in Mila's name, wives in the register don't get questioned as much. At the time, I thought it was a company matter, not about me. Now I understood. I was not merely hidden. I was a tool he used to dodge the law. I've prepared a counter-petition, Natalie continued, tapping the file lightly. If he files for divorce at his father's party as planned, this will be filed 24 hours earlier. And because he declared your name among the assets, you have the right to request a temporary freeze to protect your interests until the court decides. I looked at the neatly clipped stacks. Each sheet was a clean incision into what Zachary thought he controlled. Each piece of evidence was a step I never imagined I could take. But the thing that hurt and comforted me at once was this. I had not been wrong. The doubts, the sleepless nights, the times I called myself too suspicious. They all had reasons. We'll print 3 copies, Natalie said, bringing me back to the present. One for our counsel, one to file with the court, and one he will receive at the party. I didn't ask how she could be so certain. I trusted her. Not because she was a good lawyer, but because she was the one person who had never viewed me as the tidy housewife. I left her office that afternoon with a heavy bag of documents. But my heart was lighter than any afternoon I could remember in years. When I stepped out of the building, an October wind blew my coat, carrying the scent of dry leaves and a welcoming chill. I paused by my car, looked at the gray sky, and wondered how many women had stood exactly where I stood, between evidence and faith, between pain and courage. Back home, I still cooked, still tidied, still poured a drink for Zachary as if nothing had happened. He casually scrolled his emails and gave my shoulder a light pat when I set the salmon in front of him. Remember to wear that white cream dress next week, he said. Dad likes that color. Elegant. I nodded and smiled. He looked at me for a moment and squinted. You're very calm lately. Are you plotting something? He asked. I looked him straight in the eyes without flinching. Plotting to cook the salmon just right is exhausting enough, I said, and walked away. He laughed loudly, unaware that while he prepared, everything he thought he had set in place had already been rewritten by me. The upcoming party would not be the stage for his humiliation. It would be the place I handed him back the ending he had inadvertently signed long ago. The birthday party for Harold Coleman was held at a lakeside mansion Zachary had rented for the occasion. They wanted a vibe that was cozy yet elegant, as he put it, so they chose a space bathed in warm lights, a long table draped in ivory linens, crystal glasses sparkling, and dozens of orchid arrangements running down the center. Guests came from everywhere: relatives, former partners of Mr. Harold, a few close friends from wartime, and even those who only show up on important occasions to keep the family's face. I walked in wearing the cream-white dress Zachary had chosen for me 2 weeks earlier. A simple, modest, gentle design, fitting exactly the way he liked me to appear in front of relatives. My hair was pinned up, and my low-heeled ivory shoes made a soft scrape on the polished wood floor as I moved through groups of people talking. Everything was perfect to the point of suffocation. I smiled, nodded, and exchanged polite greetings. Zachary went ahead of me, holding a glass of wine, chatting and laughing, sometimes leaning in to whisper, "Be a little friendly. My father doesn't like a heavy atmosphere." I didn't reply. I had been doing that for 6 years. But I wasn't pretending for him or for anyone else. I was doing it to finish something, in a way no one expected. As the party reached its peak, Mr. Harold stood to speak. He was 60 this year, his face weathered by sun, his eyes still sharp despite the lines at the corners of his mouth. He thanked each person, raised his glass in a toast, then turned to Zachary. "My son has always been my pride. And tonight it seems he has something he wants to share with the family." I turned the glass of water in my hand, feeling an unusual calm. Zachary rose, straightened his vest lapel, and tapped the rim of his glass with a silver spoon. "Thank you, Father," he began clearly and crisply. "And thank you everyone for being here tonight. This is a very meaningful evening for our family, but it is also an occasion for me to share a major change in my personal life." All eyes focused on him. He looked toward me with a smile that clearly carried control. "Over the years, Mila and I have had wonderful times. But life changes. People change. And we have decided to end this marriage amicably." A soft "oh" came from a cousin on my in-law's side. I saw Harriet, my mother-in-law, lean and place a hand on her chest as if startled. Mr. Harold frowned but said nothing. Zachary continued, his tone steady, but his eyes glinted with a certain pleasure. "We have an agreement. Everything is prepared. I hope everyone will respect this decision. And here, I'd like to wish Mila the very best." He stepped to the table, pulled out a thin envelope from the inner pocket of his jacket, and set it in front of me like a belated birthday gift. People around the table fell silent. Some glanced at one another, some looked at me expectantly. I did not look at the envelope. I rose slowly and deliberately. My shoes touched the floor without a sound. I opened my clutch, took out a deep red, sturdy file, corners glossy like a well-kept book. I placed it, on the table, squarely between Zachary and me. "Thank you, Zach," I said, my voice calm but clear. "And since you chose to make this public, I will make it public as well." Zachary flinched. His eyes darted between me and the file. "The document you just presented is only a copy. The original divorce petition was filed 3 days ago at King County Court. Because you signed the joint asset agreement yourself voluntarily, without coercion, notarized, with signature verification." I pulled another copy from inside the folder and held it high enough for everyone to see the red stamp clearly in the corner. "In that document, Zachary Coleman agreed to transfer irrevocably 60% of the total marital assets into a joint account held in the names of both spouses, in which I am a co-controller. He did so voluntarily. There was no coercion." The banquet hall fell silent. Nate, his close friend seated at the far corner, dropped a spoon onto a plate. My mother-in-law turned to Zachary, lips moving without words. Mr. Harold took his reading glasses from his breast pocket, put them on, and stared at the file. Zachary was stunned. His lips pressed tight, as if struggling to keep the polite mask from falling. I don't have the right." "You do," I cut in. "Because you signed. And because you falsely reported assets with my name included. Any attempt to contest could be seen as fraudulent." I inhaled, stepped to the right, and took a colored printout from my clutch, folding it in half. "And here is a copy of the bank transaction from 2021, when you moved an investment fund labeled ZFC458AL into the name of a spousal trust, a marital asset trust with my name attached. I was never asked, but I am named. Thank you for leaving such a clear trail." Zachary looked at the paper as if it were a blade stuck into the table, among the candlelight and the soft jazz still playing in the corner. I faced the room, still, speaking gently. "I apologize for interrupting the party. But since Zachary chose this stage to announce an ending, I thought the full truth should also be announced. I will leave once I have said my final words." I looked straight into his eyes. "You miscalculated, Zach. I did not fall. And this is not my ending. It is the end of your belief that you could keep controlling me forever." Zachary stood motionless before me, hands on the table edge as if he needed the support to prevent himself from collapsing. His face, usually confident and cool, was now as frozen as a statue. A whispering buzz rose from around the room. Someone coughed. Someone timidly put down a glass. No one dared laugh or ask questions. The atmosphere congealed between the velvet drapes and the warm yellow lights. Zachary glanced at his father, then his mother. Mr. Harold sat unmoving, only adjusting his reading glasses. Harriet, my mother-in-law, was not looking at her son. She was looking at me, and I knew that look was not anger or doubt. It was solidarity. Zachary took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. Anyway, this house isn't yours. This mansion is in my name. And you will have to leave. I didn't respond at once. I breathed in slowly, then deliberately opened my clutch again. I took out a dark blue envelope. Inside was a plastic-encased document with the Pierce County Notary seal, along with a clear property ownership certificate naming the legal co-owners of the mansion as Harriet L. Coleman and Mila T. I set the paper on the table, right in front of Zachary. "You're mistaken," I said, steady and soft. "This house is not only in your name anymore. 3 months ago, it was legally transferred back into my mother-in-law's and my name's. Completely lawful." Zachary shot up from his chair, his face flushing as if struck. "What? No, that can't be. Mother." Harriet remained seated. Then she turned to her son, with an eye expression that was both weary and resolute. "I signed it myself. And I knew what I signed. But you agreed to transfer everything to me. You said it was to make management easier. You coerced me," she interrupted, not loudly but clearly enough for the whole table to hear. "You brought the papers when I had just come back from surgery, my hand shaking and unable to sign a bill. You told me it was only to update a mailing address, but it was a transfer document." Zachary could not believe his ears. "You say, you were not lucid when you signed?" he asked. "Yes," she answered evenly. "But I regained lucidity. And I revoked any wrongful transfers with a new notarized document with my own lawyer's help. And that was with Mila's assistance." All eyes in the room turned to me again, but for a very different reason. I lifted my head and looked straight at Zachary. "I've been visiting Mother every week for the past 4 months. When you said she didn't want to see anyone, she was in a rundown nursing facility, in a tiny room with a single window, and no one called to check on her even once. I was the one who pulled together the property records. I was the one who had Natalie review the transfer terms." Zachary swallowed and stammered, You deliberately tried to separate Mother from me." I shook my head. "No, Zach. You did that long ago. You wanted everything in your name. You needed people to obey you. But your mother didn't. She simply didn't have the strength to fight back until someone stood with her." Harriet turned slightly toward me and placed her hand gently over the back of my hand under the table. A very small gesture but heavier than any words could be. "This house," I said, my voice still calm, "is not a prize for you to give or take. It's where your mother has lived for almost 40 years, and it's where I cared for her when you told me you were too busy with work to come home. You want me to leave. I'm afraid that decision is no longer yours to make." Mr. Harold rested his hand on his cane and looked at his son with a quiet gaze. Then he nodded, softly, as if confirming a truth. "You were once my pride," he said, voice slow and rough. "But your pride has ruined things." Zachary stood there, unable to speak. His eyes darted from the property deed to his mother to me, as if searching for a last anchor. There was nothing left. Everything he had believed to be certain assets, status, control was slipping away right in front of the people he had always counted on as an audience for his performance. I looked at him with no anger, no fear. Only clarity that I was no longer a supporting character in this story. And he was no longer the only person allowed to write other people's endings. I turned to Harriet and said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear, "Would you like to go home early? I'll drive you." She nodded. I stood, pulled out her chair, and helped her up gently the way I had done every Friday afternoon when I visited. The room opened for us as we walked out. No one spoke. The people who had once laughed and patted Zachary on the back now watched him with new, waking eyes. As for me, I left not as the woman being divorced, not as the abandoned wife, but as someone who had reclaimed her own voice. 3 weeks after the birthday party, I sat in the sunlit kitchen of the house that was now, legally and in our hearts, mine and my mother-in-law's Harriet's. She was arranging flowers on the dining table. Despite the marks of time on her hands, her movements were steady and sure as she placed white orchid stems into a tall glass vase. She said those flowers should be placed by the window to catch the light. I didn't argue. Since we began living together, I had come to understand that small things can soothe more effectively than words. This house used to make me feel lost, like a stage where I only pulled the curtains. Now each room breathed new life. Old family photos were dusted and reframed. The drapes were replaced with brighter fabric. And the scent in the house was no longer Zachary's expensive cologne. It was the smell of bread baking each morning, herbal tea in the afternoons, and sometimes lavender from a small sachet I kept beneath a pillow. I still rose early, but now to prepare for a small class at the community center about a 10-minute drive away. Natalie was the one who first suggested I share what I had learned. I refused at first. Who would want a woman freshly out of an abusive marriage to teach personal finance? But Natalie said one sentence that kept me thinking, "You're the person they need, not someone from Ivy League. Someone who knows what it's like to have to ask permission to buy a bottle of shampoo." I called the class self-sufficiency, because to me that was the basic skill so many women had never been taught. On opening day there were only 6 people signed up. One was a 50-something housewife who had to have her husband withdraw her pension checks. One was a student who had left school because her boyfriend controlled her spending. And one was a young woman of 29 who had been forced by her husband to sign for loans he never repaid. We started with the simplest things: how to build a budget, how to check account information, how to secure passwords, how to get out of a joint account when the other person has control. Each lesson was a piece of the story I had lived through, and when I told it, no one looked at me with pity. They looked at me like someone who had survived. I felt myself heal a little more with every face. Harriet often came to class on weekends not to learn, but to make tea, tidy up, and sit at the back like someone keeping the air. She said she didn't understand all the financial terms, but she understood how silence can kill. If someone had told me what you tell them, now, she once told me, I wouldn't have taken 10 years to realize my own child was controlling me. As for Zachary, I don't know where he is now. The last I heard, he was suspended from his position at the firm amid an internal investigation into tax evasion and falsified asset declarations. The transactions were quietly sent to the FBI by Brittany, the former assistant and once his lover, after he fired her in a cold midnight email. She said nothing else, only sending documents, contact details, and a short note, "Not because I'm noble but because I'm tired of being used." I never saw Brittany again. I didn't feel the need to. Some allies appear at the right moment, not to walk beside you forever, but to help you step through a door you thought you could never open. Zachary once believed he was above the law. He thought pretty numbers on paper and a few social connections would cover every gap. But that arrogance exposed his greatest weakness. He never thought anyone would pull the pin while he was still indulging in the role of the ideal husband. One afternoon, as I was clearing the meeting room after class, Natalie came by with a half-serious, half-smiling expression. "Did you know the bank account Zachary opened under your name has been completely frozen?" she asked. I nodded. I figured. Did he file a complaint with the court? He did. But it's not effective. You have signatures, evidence, and your mother's testimony. Oh, and a fun detail. I looked at her. He tried to use your papers to open a new investment fund after he was suspended. It was rejected because you put your name on the legal protection list. Any transaction with your name now requires your direct approval. I said nothing. I quietly drew my coat tighter and looked out at the community center lawn. A group of children were playing soccer. Their laughter echoed in the late afternoon. I realized I had never felt so light, like I had just given back the weight of the years I'd been carrying. That evening I returned home and made a simple meal with Harriet, a mushroom soup and toasted bread. After dinner I made tea, sat on the back porch, and finished a chapter in a book about financial skills for older women. Harriet knitted beside me, the warm lamp casting soft shadows over her silver hair. "You know," she said without taking her hands off the needles, "every time I watch you teach those young women I think, maybe I deserve a little life of my own again." I set the teacup down on the table. "Not just to come back to life," I said, "but to live rightly." She nodded, eyes shining with unspoken trust. I sat there, listening to the soft click of her knitting needles, in a house no longer shadowed by Zachary, but filled with the warmth of freedom and the peace I finally knew I deserved. A year later, The mansion that had once been a stage for control and coldness wore a completely different look. The gray walls were repainted a soft cream. The windows widened to welcome the spring breeze, and where a gleaming bar once stood there was now a small reception desk with a wooden sign hand-lettered. The Revival Center, where women don't need permission to begin again. I stood behind the front door, inhaling the scent of new wood, peppermint tea in the air, and the low murmur of women gathered inside. Today's workshop was the first in a 6-week series, a program called Financial Independence and Legal Protection for Women Who Were Once Financially Dependent. More than 100 people came from many places. Some took an early train from Spokane, some rented a car with friends from Bellingham, and a few even flew in from other states just to attend. They weren't there only to hear me speak. They came to see that standing up after a failed marriage is not shameful. It's a brave journey, sometimes requiring you to step beyond your own shadow. Natalie was the first to arrive this morning, still brisk, in a white shirt with her hair up. She smiled and handed me a neat packet of printed materials stamped and bound. "I thought you might be late," I teased. "Not when you're the speaker," she replied, winking. "You have no idea how many people are waiting to hear you tell the truth, not angrily, but with weight." Shortly after, Brittany walked in. She wore an olive green shift dress, her hair down naturally. The last time I had seen Brittany was more than 10 months earlier at an internal hearing at Zachary's firm, when she handed over the evidence of his financial misconduct to the board. She didn't apologize or explain. She was simply a woman who had once lost her way and turned back at the right moment. "You know," she said when she saw me looking, "I used to think I was on the other side." I shook my head gently. "You were just put in the wrong place." Harriet arrived next, leaning on a cane but standing straight. She wore a wine-colored cardigan, and her eyes brightened when she saw me approach. "You did it," she whispered, taking my hand. "Not by pushing anyone down, but by standing up yourself." The workshop opened with a short video. Images of women of all ages, professions, and regions, intercut with brief interviews about what they had lost: jobs, identity, control over finances, and faith in themselves. When the video ended, I stepped onto the small wooden stage. The lights were soft, nothing like the stage spotlights Zachary used to rent. Down below, more than 100 faces watched me without blinking. A few people wept, a few held hands as if to steady one another. I took the microphone and scanned the room. "Hello everyone," I began slowly. "My name is Mila Coleman. I used to live in a house just like the one some of you might have seen, big, beautiful, elegant, but I couldn't call it home. Every day in that house I felt like a stranger, like a beautiful ornament with no voice." I paused, letting the words settle. "They call us weak. They tell us we're overly sensitive, fragile, dependent. But what is the truth? The truth is we are taught to endure, encouraged to be silent, and expected to forgive even when we are hurt. We aren't weak by nature. We are weak because society prefers not to see us strong." I stepped down one foot and moved closer to the front row. "But I'm not here today to talk about revenge. I don't want anyone to go out into the world carrying hatred in their heart. I'm here to talk about something else. Something stronger. Preparation. Knowledge. The power to decide for yourself." I looked at Brittany, then Natalie, then Harriet. Each of them was part of the story that had brought me here. Preparation is power. And revival isn't something someone else does for you. It's the path you walk yourself, with your own hands and the belief that you deserve more. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then building. I bowed my head slightly in thanks, my eyes prickling, my heart feeling light. Just then the back door of the hall opened. A little girl with soft brown curls ran in, her blue floral dress fluttering. "Mom!" she cried. I didn't have to turn to know that voice. I crouched down and wrapped my arms around her. Her small arms smelled faintly of powder and the first sunlight of summer. I hugged her, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You came at just the right time, Hope." People clapped again, not just for the speech but for hope. The child, the baby I had not believed I could carry in a body that had been abandoned, a soul that had been shattered, was now living, laughing, and the clearest proof of what I'd just said: revival is real. I stood with Hope in my arms and faced the room. "This is Hope. Her name means hope. Because That's the one thing I kept through the darkest years. The room fell quiet for a beat. Then genuine, moved applause filled the space, like everyone exhaling after holding their breath too long. I am not a hero. I am just a woman who decided she would not be swallowed again. And today I am not standing alone. I stand among women who are learning to rise one by one. Together, without asking permission, without fear. And never returning to the old roles. I know many of you watching right now carry untold stories. Maybe you've never lived with someone like Zachary, but somewhere in life you were led to believe you were weak, not good enough, not worthy of respect. If you have ever felt that way even once, remember, you are not alone. I share this story not to dig into old wounds but to open a new path. To let those in the dark know there is a way out. To let those who stayed silent know they, too, can rise one day strong and composed, just as they have dreamed. I would love to hear your thoughts after watching this story. Have you ever been in a situation like mine? Or have you witnessed someone go through something similar? Leave a comment below, even just one line, because sometimes a small share can be the light someone else desperately needs. And if you find stories like this meaningful, please consider following the channel. Behind every closed door is a story worth telling. We will continue to share real stories, deep family moments, and everyday lessons that many of us have lived through but have never dared to name. Thank you for listening. See you in the next stories.